So in the last hour, we thought we would try and wrap this day up. You've taken a lot of information in, you're probably all really tired, and you may just like to leave. So if you all put up your hands and say what you want to go, we'll respect that. But if you don't, I'm happy to carry on and try and bring together some of the threads. Because what we wanted to do today was really start a conversation. You've had some great input, some great ideas, a huge amount of information to digest. What we'd like to do, if you're willing, is try and tie it together into some coherent story we can start putting together and start putting out there, and also into some concrete actions that we could be advocating for in the next state election. So maybe to kick it off, I've asked a couple of people to come forward and maybe share their reflections on the day. But for those people who have a copy of Norman's report or plan, there are at the back of that document 12 actions that are identified as the first steps in implementing this plan. So I'd suggest maybe spend a bit of time looking at that while I get the other panellists together, and we'll ask them to share their reflections on today, what they see as the critical things that we need to act on.
We put together today, frankly, to get this plan out in the public for discussion. But we looked for speakers who could talk to different aspects of the themes that appear in this plan. And we had an advance Zoom meeting a couple of weeks ago with people who could speak to the different aspects. I made it clear that it wasn't a condition of speaking that you agreed with this plan or the things that were in it. You could disagree with it, but speak to those themes. I hadn't actually thought that I would get as much out of those individually designed presentations as I have. I can see now, and this should be true of any plan, that the next iteration of this should include some of the insights put forward by different speakers today. So I'm really pleased about that. I could spend a couple of days with Tom Wilson reworking the transport plan and make it much better.
Paul Ledbetter, I'm a councillor on the National Trust. I'm also an environmental land use. Don't throw tomatoes at me. I'm also a member of the State Commission Assessment Panel. One of the problems I have with a vision like the 50-year planning vision is we seem to have lost the art in this state of the country of that long-term planning. Everything's done on really a 4-year political cycle. And so we get a new government, they then change the direction, this constant swapping and changing. And I don't know how we do it, but how do we, as a society, get our governing bodies to look into the longer term, not just to the next election, but what we want leaders who are going to have a vision for the future. They want to see the city, because I'm concerned about what the future's going to be like for my kids, what's the future going to be like for their kids, and the only way you can have some comfort about that is if we start planning for the much longer term. The other thing I'm really concerned about, and I think it's come out in various of the presentations today, is the disempowerment of people in the planning process. I've been a land use planning lawyer for about 35 years, and I've seen us go from almost complete third-party involvement in planning applications to now there's hardly any rights for individuals to comment on and then, if they wish to, challenge decisions that are made by planning authorities. I think 35 years ago it was probably too far in one direction, but now we've swung to right across to a stage where the community must feel very disempowered in the whole planning process. And when the Planning and Development and Infrastructure Act was being debated in Parliament, they talked about the community engagement charter, which is really, I think, a pretty useless document. in terms of what it achieves. John Rao stressed that the community should focus on the planning process, the development of the planning policy against which development assessment decisions could be made. He said at the time that if people focus, what we need to get is the community focusing on the development planning policy. If they're happy with the planning policy, then there's not going to be the need for the community to get involved on individual development applications. Well, I think that shows a complete misunderstanding of human nature for a start. But in any event, and I think the big test of that is going to be this Riverbank Code Amendment proposal. If that's gone out to community consultation, I understand there's been a lot of adverse comments made in relation to that planning policy. It will be very interesting to see whether the Commission and the Minister pick up on that and change the policy or delete, don't proceed with the amendment. If they proceed with the amendment and the amendment goes ahead, well then I think that really shows that the process we have under the current system for public consultation and engagement is really a very tokenistic, rather useless process.
Well, I'm going to say, first of all, grateful thanks to all the presenters who gave up their time today. I really think they deserve a huge round of applause, those who are still here. And we're leaving here today with all that we've heard that relates to a future plan or vision for our beautiful city. With so many thoughts on climate change, what can we do about that in the context of planning, the effects of Zoom shock, public transport issues into the future, and the role of the community in planning ahead. And planning ahead, not just for this election period, as Paul said, but seriously planning ahead. And as Stephanie was talking about, will our city or parts of it and the Mount Lofty Ranges achieve World Heritage listing? I do hope so. As caring and responsible citizens, I'm asking you to please spread the word about what you've heard today and encourage people to come along to our next two forums, one on trees on the 1st of December and then the other one in the middle of February, just before the election. And also, please act as our agents and ask people to sign the two petitions on Ayers House and Martindale Hall. What the National Trust wants in this planning context is to preserve the best of what Adelaide has, and it has so much that is the best in my view, and that must be an expanded vision meeting the challenges of definitely our changing climate and make future Adelaide the envy of the world and an even more wonderful place for our future generations to live. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm now going to hand over to you because I want to hear what are the things that you really think we need to take forward from today. I'll talk a bit about the process for that, but really it's open for hands up to share any conclusions, discoveries today. Kevin?
Yeah, just in the current draft, that was my interpretation.
I think you missed the discussion there, Kevin, because the emphasis is on taking the legacy transport networks, especially the railways and the tramways, and if, because of population growth that might happen but hasn't been happening, the community believes there must be densification. Place that densification near the stations and the stops and the important facilities along those transports. This plan is not a recommendation for any form of densification, but to be credible, it must contain an answer to those in the development industry that say, without densification somehow, we will invade our farmlands, destroy our vineyards, and make a mess beyond the boundaries of the city. That's why that stuff is there. I'm just reminded of a public meeting in the 80s, and in the back row, it was on issues like these. In the back row was former Premier Don Dunstan sitting there, and I was on the front thing, and I said, well, it's all very well to talk about what we could do. As former Premier Dunstan has said, we could be like Amsterdam, we could be like Copenhagen, we could be like inner Paris and preserve our scale and so forth, but we don't seem to be able to do it. And this stentorian voice from the back of the hall said, we only need to keep our nerve. But it's precisely that you've touched on. How do you keep your nerve? The attempt in this draft plan was to say you try and put together a plan that everyone in the community can sign up to, that has concrete, easily understood goals, and that on which progress can be measured.
I've been blown away by the information I've learnt today. I've only learnt splatterings of it before coming today. The two things that jump out at me, I'm feeling very despondent that we're on a losing race. And the other thing is we need to get the message out there better. We need some young people's support to feed into a Facebook page and all the other mediums that people use today. And also, for instance, I live up near Blackwood, and there's a Blackwood Community News up there, and then there's the Herald that seems to work within the eastern suburbs and the hills as well. I think we need weekly information kind of reported in those newspapers. The local newspapers do get read. I've been involved in heritage stuff up in the hills, Mitcham Hills, and for about 10 years now we've been putting in monthly heritage information with a theme for the year as a means of promoting the local history. The other thing that jumps out at me is, okay, we're losing, like for instance, for the last 20 years or so, I've walked Somerton to Glenelg back with friends. I've been taking photographs of the houses, and sure enough, oh, that one's gone, that one's gone. There needs to be a large photographic record taken so that we can't say, oh, what used to be there? So the photographic record can become part of your information articles and let the people know what's happened in the next street that they may not have driven down. Anyway, that's me.
Thank you. I can't resist the opportunity to say that I think the most important thing we have to do is, and thanks to Sandy's examples of before and after, and how we can retain our built heritage stock. As somebody who sat on 3 panels in Burnside Council and have to argue for retention of those heritage buildings, I think this is critical. I live in a historic conservation zone, I'm still going to call it that. We all agree that our individual houses contribute to that whole of that zone, and we want to keep them retained in Eastwood. The other thing we need to do, I've sat on a panel where the whole council was the development panel, then it was removed to 3, and through one motion on council, which we put to the Ledge Council, we wanted reinstatement of 3, but Rao didn't. He wanted none. We got 1. That's why we have 1 elected member on a panel now. That's not enough. The whole community feels as though they have been, the word is disenfranchised, and that's what we need to restore. And I'm disappointed that it's the Liberal Party that is doing this. We can't fix the 16 years of Rao's government in one term of government. but we can improve it bit by bit.
That was our hope in the National Trust, that putting this out there, if people agreed with it, we tried to make it simple things that would win agreement from all across the spectrum of the community, except those with a financial interest contrary to it, in the hopes that individual councils, community organisations, residents associations and things might endorse it. And it's hopeless to say, all right, let's put this up to a member of parliament and get the government to legislate. It has to have broad community support first. And when you can say, this has been endorsed by 16 metropolitan councils and this many residents associations and community alliance and so forth, then you begin to catch people's ears.
Okay, I might take that one. Thanks, Warren. Yeah, exactly. This is part of a process. And what we said at the start of today, this is the start of a conversation. So what we're trying to do, that's why we wanted to hear from you, is get your feedback on the plan. As Norman says, it's a work in progress. It's not a finished point. But as Norman just explained, we are trying to change the conversation about planning because it's become, well, we spent 5 years trying to work with the PDI Act and the Planning Design Code. We were all dudded. We were all taken for a ride. So now we've got to come back and actually regroup, and I think we want to regroup around, I've got 6 headings here I'll run past you. One is the vision, and I think we've seen a vision today. We've heard about what a vision needs to do. It needs to have some principles behind it. I think the thing that Stephanie raised about future focus, I think is really important. We've got to look at that kind of long-term view, and the idea of heritage in particular as a future-making tool is an idea we can develop. We've got to look at the reform process. We've all identified what's wrong with the legislation, the planning policies, the administration, some other things around political donations as well. So there's a whole lot of reform things we can take up. The protection issue is a perennial one, but we've got some very, very immediate challenges with the parklands, looking at protecting open space, trees, listing. So there's all those headings we can work through, and I've added participation and restoration. So they're the 6 headings I'm taking away from today. What we all do with what we've heard today, and I still want to hear some more, is basically start to shape that into an agenda where we actually start that conversation as broadly as we can with the politicians, but also with the community about what's being lost and what's at risk and what are the future challenges. So I think we do have all the ingredients here today, just how we put it together and how we get it out there. So that's what we're trying to do, Warren. Of course. And you'll see at the back of the program, at the back of the plan, there's a web page on the National Trust website. So that's where all this stuff will end up living, and the videos from today will be there. We'll keep adding stuff, we'll keep adding more ideas. So as I said, this is the start of a conversation, and the web, and obviously social media will be part of that as well. So that's where it begins.
I am sure, I'm Tom from Community Alliance. I'm sorry for sort of doing this, but I can't think of doing it any other way. I am sick and tired of being ignored by the government. I'm sick and tired of being ignored to the extent where they, put these dreadful, absolutely dreadful proposals before us, and we are being ignored. We're being told what's going to happen. Fakey-makey consultation, it's just appalling. I've been sort of involved with this for 10 years. Norman and David, you've been doing this for longer than I have, and I'm just wondering as a perhaps a proposition, maybe I'm dreaming, I don't know, but could the National Trust, could the EDO, could the Community Alliance, could the Adelaide Parklands Preservation Association, could we collectively meet with the Minister and talk about this and collectively tell them we have thousands of people in Adelaide who are similarly disaffected, very annoyed, very cross, and all those other things which I won't mention. Could we meet with the Minister and tell her what we feel and what has to be changed? That's the sort of thing I'd like to see. I don't know what you think, but maybe it's worthwhile discussing, maybe it's not. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Tom. I think it is worthwhile discussing, but I think what we're trying to do today is work out exactly what we do want to ask for, because I think we haven't quite defined all those things yet, but we should get those groups together. Kelly, Chris.
Studies have shown in various places that preserving wholesale heritage areas raises property values, increases tourism, enhances business, brings vibrant entertainment districts, do all these things. Convincing people, here is another thing. One of my unfinished projects is to try and demonstrate street by street that it was not new buildings but old buildings that attracted restaurants, cafes, artists, all the things that make cities energized.
Well, I think Sandy's done the best work, I think, in that field and really documenting, I suppose, what we're losing and what we're getting in its place. And I think we can do a lot more to publicise that, I think, as the lady over there was saying before too. So there's certainly much more work to do to document, you know, the short changing that's going on with these infill developments. Do you want to say?
And I was going to say that the National Trust's emphasis is always on preserving the best of what we have, which has stood the test of time. So we've refrained from making comments on what's going up around us. We're often appalled, but then there are other organisations like the Civic Trust and the Institute of Architects that do commit themselves to better urban. We cheer them on, but it's not our game.
Great set of questions. I'll let Norman respond. But I think first I would just say that we're talking both long-term and short-term game here. So there is a long-term game about changing the conversation, about looking, you know, with that 50-year framework in mind. But there is a short-term imperative of what things do we want to advance as part of the election campaign. So this is one of three kind of public forums that we're doing. So this is really that thinking long-term, I think, is the main message from today. But there are some things that we could advocate for now that still fit within that bigger frame. And I think there's some very urgent things. Obviously, the Parklands Code Amendment. Well, obviously some people knew it was coming, but no one else seemed to know it was coming until 2 months ago. So I think there are things coming at us thick and fast, so we have to be kind of agile. But I think what we get from this, and I think what Norman's given us in such a generous way, is a way to think for the long term, but we've got to act in the short term. So that's the way I would understand it. That's right. Okay, well, I think most people wouldn't disagree with you, but I think that's quite a big shift to change the whole system that's gone steadily towards being about servicing developers rather than serving what the community wants. But we've got to educate the community to advocate for those changes. So, yeah, I don't think anyone... Alyssa?
You just list people who just ignore it.
Well, Tom's view and mine approaches are slightly different because Tom's got this decades of experience and knows all the routes that might have been. I just started with the simple idea that you don't throw away what you have. You've got a rail system, you've got a tram system.
That's fine.
Yeah. Another problem that we face is one we haven't discussed here. The areas of the bureaucracy that deal with many of these issues have been gutted over the years. They do not have the personnel to address them. You and I went along to a meeting over local heritage with one of the planning bureaucrats, you'll remember it well, and I said, and she couldn't confute it, that I brought more planning expertise to the meeting than she had in her office. And it was true, the Heritage Council has been gutted. They have hardly any officers to deal with the things that they need to deal with. So the community, building community support is the only way you can change these things. Even if you've got a government to start adopting some of these ideas now, they don't have the expertise, they don't have the knowledge to know how to do it. It's true.
The only thing I'd say about climate change is I think it's such a pressing, important issue that with development decisions, it ought to be a key consideration that the assessment authority always has to take into account whenever making a development decision. So they have to consider what are the climate change implications of approving this particular form of development. No, there's no statutory requirement for them to take that into account at the moment. The legislation is not strong enough.
Okay, So I just remind you about this web page. Visit there, send us your comments by email. Deborah's going to just say a few final words.
I'm just going to say thank you all for coming along and contributing today as you have. And we've got some small gifts for our own speakers who are still here.
Thank you, I just say thank you to everyone who organised this, Darren.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Paz down there did a huge job to bring this all together. So thank you, Paz. Okay, so who else?
And spread the word, we can do it.